everyone. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. I'm Jim Cardle. While a lot of the political debate these days may be focused on the Trump media hurricane, the Democrat debates, and maybe climate change, there's plenty of economic activity driving the Texas economy and the national economy. Marc Flaster is our chairman of the Texas Insider Economic Board, and we're pleased to be able to visit with him to see what's driving oil and gas prices, what the economic outlook is, and if folks are really even interested in politics these days on this edition of the Texas Insider Show. Well, Marc Flaster, chairman of the Texas Economic Council, we appreciate you taking time and coming in today. Thanks for joining us.
It's always my pleasure to be here, just to figure out a way to get into Austin instead of near Austin.
We got too much traffic, and you got to navigate everything. But we appreciate you coming in because there's a lot of focus these days, obviously, on the Trump media hurricane sucking all the air out of the room. But nobody's talking economics anymore. Maybe here this week, and after the Federal Reserve's taken some action, which I want to start off with. Because of the economy and the impact of the Federal Reserve, the economy's been strong. A lot of people are trying to project and see what it'll be for the impacts on the 2020 election. But talk about the Federal Reserve Board met the other day. They're continuing to lower interest rates. Give us your thumbnail update if you can.
Well, just quickly, they're meeting yesterday and today at 2 o'clock New York time. They're going to report a cut in the funds rate target from 2% to 175. But understand this, that the Fed has been behind the 8-ball, not in front of it, and world interest rates and domestic interest rates are lower than where the Fed is.
Really?
And they carry several, we'll say, reasons that they feel that support their strategy. One, if there is a recession, one of the ingredients that they have or strategies they have at their disposal is to collapse interest rates, which Bernanke did during his tenure and took it down.
The previous Fed chairman.
Which took it down to zero, and that helped energize some activity. I have questions whether that's true or not, because the real problems were solvable from other sources, not from interest rates. And now we see that a good part of Europe is in negative interest rates, and they're experiencing if not a recession, no growth, and the fact that the central banks have made it expensive to have money, because you have to pay to store it, and so there's no return at all.
What we in America think of CD rates or your bank savings rate,
yes.
Right?
So,
storage fee.
So what we have here is several things going on. One, demand for money has weakened, and that's allowed interest rates to go lower. And we have a foreign investor who is bringing money into our country because he gets no return on his money
anywhere else
in keeping it in his own country, and in fact, and the dollar's appreciated, so he gets a value in the currency exchange, and he gets a positive return on the money that he's invested. The other thing is that I've mentioned in the things that I write that the Fed chairman, Mr. Powell, and his group are committed to an old saw of monetary management that's called the Phillips curve. That was something that was put together almost 50 years ago. That
you learn about in economics class in college.
You might. I don't know what they teach today. But the important thing on the Phillips curve is that it says that if you have low unemployment, which we have, then you're going to have a market that is going to compete for labor and will pay up for labor. Labor then being better compensated will be spending that money. So sales, retail sales, which represents consumer activity, represents 75% of our economy. That will then bid up the price of goods and services that they seek, and that price matrix will then show up in the consumer price index, and
inflation,
and be represented a rise in the inflation activity. Well, here we are, and we have low interest rates. We have a low unemployment rate.
Record low unemployment rates.
And that's
rising wages as a result.
Well, not very high rising wages.
Okay.
We have some improvement in wages, but we'll get to that in a second. But the important thing is that inflation and inflation expectations have fallen away. So your consumer doesn't have expectations of higher inflation, and the inflation indices have been falling and moving down to levels that they haven't been seen in ages. And our Fed sits there and says, well, this is all temporary. We know that there's a fire burning under all this, and well, we want to demonstrate that we're prepared. Now, one of the reasons they went to 2.5 at the end of the year and raised the rate, which caused some angst in the White House, it was that they felt that there was something coming very quickly and they had to prepare for it. Well, it didn't come at all. And then they slowly have been recognizing, I think, that maybe things have changed, but they haven't changed for them. You've got to understand that our whole consumer activity and sourcing activity, we're a world that's interdependent, no matter what our socialist or nationalist president says. We shop online, and it's a whole new idea of the distribution of iPhones and iPads, which in the past was a way to have information available, is now a sourcing activity, so that you can compare pricing, you compare products. You don't have to go to a store anymore if you want to buy something. If you as you look for the things to do, you're able to find things that are beyond the local, let's say, local geography.
What folks typically thought about as their world is expanded.
Is expanded. So what you have out of this is a whole new phenomenon, and that's another something that's very interesting, is that people travel. And they travel a lot, and your new millennial generation, or whoever we want to define that, they have not only decided that that's, at this point in their lives, that's very important to expand their horizons in seeing other cultures and seeing other things, or just traveling around having experiences, and in exchange for that, having that they're in a limited income. Mostly you think of people at the more of retirement age who are traveling because they've satisfied all the needs of home ownership and children and advancement for their sake,
wealth building,
and now they have time. Well, now you have children that are just youngsters are just beginning, and they're spending their resources in this mode, and where they're not spending their resources is in housing and shelter. So we're seeing a whole change in shelter, where we're building units that are not only multifamily units, but they're basically hotel rooms that are beds. And instead of having and they may have the bathroom in the same unit or down the hall, whatever it is, but people are willing to live in company of others who are not codependent.
And I wanted to, you're talking about a mindset. I wanted to ask you about that per se. Folks, I want to thank you for joining us again for this edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers, visiting with Marc Flaster. Marc, you mentioned a second ago the rising or the low unemployment. There is rising wages of sorts. We here in Texas see frequently companies poaching employees from other companies because that's where they can find the labor. But all this has got to be setting a positive tone in the consumer's mind.
Well, no, that's not true. What's put the positive tone in the consumer's mind is because they're offered credit.
Really? I wanted to get your opinion.
Credit is, you cannot buy anything today for, you cannot buy anything without somebody saying, let me give you the money to make this purchase, because that that credit expansion is then being paid feed to the source. So if you go to buy a car today, you can't pay cash.
Really?
You'll get a discount for everyone to negotiate a discount off the list price, but then the dealer will tell you that if you allow me to give you buy it on a
Credit card or loan, I guess.
On a loan, I said I'll give you an additional couple of $1,000
discount, really,
off the list price, and then he turns around and of course he goes to a lender and says, I have a borrower for you, and here's his financials, whatever, and the lender says fine, and he then pays a fee to the dealer for bringing him a new loan.
So what's the mindset of the consumer?
I'm going to say the other side of that is that as the buyer, you can pay that loan off in 30 days or less, and all that other stuff stayed intact. But what's happening is that the consumer is awash in opportunity of credit, and they're building a larger credit, let's say, profile than they have the income to support. And so what we're seeing is that to have multiple credit cards, if you will, to balance one or the other. You have something the other day, the bank employees complained that the money that the company put in their account as from their payroll was not good for withdrawal from the bank for 2 days. And they complained and said, I have bills to pay right now that if I don't pay them right the day, I'll have a penalty. So I want that to be in good funds the day of the payment date.
Which is a bank issue.
So the bank has now says, I've got to basically extend credit where I'm not really getting paid for it, so I've got to improve my cycle benefits.
Gotcha. Okay, folks, I want to pivot a little bit, Mark, if I can. We're visiting today with Marc Flaster, Chairman of the Texas Insider Economic Council. Mark, let's move maybe a little more domestically into the state of Texas and talk about oil and gas prices. We're seeing now the commentary about the United States being energy independent, the state of Texas exporting natural gas, liquefied natural gas. There is an abundance of energy seemingly in the world today, but yet prices continue to hover in the 50, 55 per barrel range. What do you see is holding up the price of the barrel of oil right now? Is there any danger in the future? You've come from San Antonio, you've traveled the state this week. What's going on with oil and gas prices right now?
Well, the problem continues to be the Middle East, and the risk of the Middle East conflagrating, or whatever the word is.
Conflict over there.
So there's no stability between the Kurds and ISIS and the Iranians and the Iraqis and the Saudis, and who's in charge, and what can they provide in protection for their own people, and the fact that the people have very little, and the politics are all corrupt, and the people who manage their countries are insular in that respect, and so if you were ever able to stabilize that in some manner and feel that it was secure, then the price would be a lot lower. There's several things that happen that are very important. One is that the technology and innovation and technology are two of the biggest events of the world that have changed our whole complex of economics and monetary management.
You're talking about fracking primarily.
Well, for here it's fracking.
In this subject.
And the fracking has allowed for tremendous, not only exploration, but then development of oil fields, so that now the United States is no longer dependent on imports. We're an exporter. And so if you look at the volume of oil that's consumed or needed in the world, there's in great oversupply. And in order to support the Saudi economy and the members of that OPEC group, they need a higher price. So what they've announced is that they are going to reduce their production so that they can hold the price up. And here we are starting to export the oil because we've got so much.
Okay.
And so the holding the price up is good for us as well, because it makes it more valuable to continue to
exploration and
explore.
employment in the oil patch. Yeah.
But the net of it all is at some point it's going to reach a point that beyond, we'll say, no return. And we've already seen some of the OPEC countries step back and say, look, you know, we agree in theory what you're trying to do, but quite frankly, there's not enough oil being sold to meet our budget, and we need to sell more oil. So I'll tell you what, you cut back over there because you're so wealthy you can afford it, okay? And we'll sell our oil a couple bucks cheaper, okay? But because of the price you've set, I'm still getting more than I would if there was no price set. Okay?
And aside of the fear in the Middle East or the fear of disruption of oil supply in the Middle East,
well, we already had that with
you could see a decline in the oil and gas price, I guess.
A big supply. And then here in the United States, or in West Texas, we've already seen a number of producers to announce that they've either shutting down or they're filing for bankruptcy, that they just can't continue to produce or to explore, given the fact that there's so much supply that they can't find a return that's going to meet what they're spending for exploration at the moment.
Okay, one final question for Marc Flaster today. I know you got a plane to catch, Marc, but let's now pivot to politics. We've got this series of Democrat debates coming up. The next one's going to be over in Atlanta in a few weeks. I'm curious, because of the Trump media, what I'll call the Trump media hurricane, and this discussion of socialism on the Democrat stage, what is the mindset of Wall Street, or how much are politics impacting financial markets these days?
Well,
whether it's actual economic outlooks or mental stability impacts.
I'm really not the best source to have this discussion, because there is no answer in which, or commentary in which somebody could say that this makes sense. Okay, there is no.
Well,
sense.
that's good enough right there.
There is no sense. So you start out with 25 or 26 potential candidates for the nomination ticket. You're down to 18, maybe 17 at the end of this weekend. I think another's about to step out. The fact that they found money that can support them is phenomenal. It's an ego trip for some, for others. I don't know what
for the campaign contributions. Yeah.
But the media is having a wonderful time with it. I think the thing that I've observed is that from what I'm reading, is that the news media, particularly the television news media, which most people use for their for their information resources, are losing viewership because they continue to run over this thing again and again and again, and they constantly rehash things that were said before, or have people talk about what if, what possible, what if. It's just too. It's
too much gotcha television, or the boy that cried wolf already.
Yeah, it's too much of activity, I would say, there's nothing concrete that's coming out of it.
So do you think that
each of the candidates seems on almost by a daily basis, when the sun comes up, they have another idea of how they're going to buy your vote by giving away more of the government. That is the interesting thing, and I wrote this, one of the pieces I wrote, is that government already is a gifter, and you got a Congress that spends all their day, and for 2 years in the House and the 6 years as a senator, that is what they've defined as being their job, to find a way to give more of the government largesse. And these people are saying, well, I'll do this. I said, they're already doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, they haven't changed anything that is already in
We're
place.
already getting free college. We're already getting free health care.
I mean, all these things are already in place.
Yeah.
You want to find, you know, this person because of their particular illness or particular physical ailment has larger access to something than somebody else, and I don't know how far that goes down the road, but you have an awful lot of people today. You know, I was saying something myself the other day is that people used to travel the world to see how others lived. Now they travel the world, complain that others don't accept them the way they are, and so right away they're causing conflict.
Yes, wise words from our Economic Council Chairman, Marc Flaster. We're going to leave it at that.
All right. Thank you very much for your opportunity to chat today.
Yes, we appreciate you folks. We're going to put a plug in the jug. Appreciate you joining us for this edition of the Texas Insider TV show. Marc Flaster, appreciate you coming in. Be sure and tune in for the next edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. I'm Jim Cardle.